join me in welcoming Ryan Gravel, who the Atlanta BeltLine was his brainchild, to the TEDxAtlanta stage.
Thank you. Wow. That's quite an introduction. I don't think I can live. I'm almost positive that I will not live up to that. So I'll jump into my presentation. I had the great fortune of spending my senior year in college in Paris as part of Georgia Tech's architecture program, and you live there and you eat fresh food at the local market and you walk everywhere you go and ride transit everywhere you go. It's a really civilized way to live. It's really unbelievable. And then I moved back to Atlanta that summer and drove at the top end of I-285 every day. And there's a lot of great things about Atlanta, but this isn't one of them. And I was quite miserable and wondering, but I grew up here and I want to live here, and I was interested in the problem of how do you make Atlanta into the kind of place you might want to live for the rest of your life. And particularly I was interested in the physical problem of Atlanta. Fortunately, Atlanta is like the most fantastic place in the world, or at least in the country, to study the new American city, what the city is going to be like in the 21st century. A lot of people write about Atlanta. A lot of people like James Kunstler conclude that Atlanta's only plausible destiny is to become significantly depopulated, which is funny, haha. But for those of us who live here and want to make a better place, it's not a very hopeful vision for the future. I much prefer Rem Koolhaas, a Dutch architect, who has a similar criticism of Atlanta's splintered, sprawling, fragmented region, but comes to a more hopeful vision, and that is that as we start to solve the problems we've created, we have the opportunity to make Atlanta into a pretty interesting place, possibly as interesting as Paris, although obviously quite different. And so that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of approach to things that I like. So the short version of the physical problem, just to sum it up, is this. And we used to build cities like this. They were integrated. You could walk everywhere. You could ride transit. Things were compact and close together. There were different ways to get places, and it was a fairly sustainable way to live. Had other problems, but that's beside the point. So then we decided that maybe it's a good idea to separate the slaughterhouses and the toxic chemicals away from the residential districts, which is great. Sure, it makes sense. Probably still makes sense today. But the legal basis on which that was determined, the regulatory power is in the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. And just remember that, because I'm going to come back to it in just a second. So we separated out the industry, but then we kind of went crazy. We kept separating out things. We separated everything from everybody. So we separated residential not only from everything else going on in the city, but we separated it from how much money you make, depending on what kind of house you can buy. And because everything was spread out over this vast territory, we couldn't get anywhere by transit or by trail or by walking, and so everybody had to get in a car. And by the time we are where we are today, the problems are so fundamental to the way that we're set up that it's hard to fix the problem. Everybody has to get out on the highway to go anywhere, to go to the park, to go to the store, to go anywhere, and it's starting to degrade our quality of life. The problem is not just your transit, your commute and your drive in your car in the morning. It's transit is less efficient because it has to go further. Water, sewer, municipal services, emergency vehicles, school buses, all these things take longer to get places, are more disconnected, get stuck in the same traffic. And also there's a lot of public health impacts from that. We live a more sedentary lifestyle. We are more prone to chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes, all kinds of other things. Childhood obesity from 6 to 10 is 20% in this country, which is just unbelievable. And so it seemed like to me that nobody was really asking, what kind of place do we want to be? Is this the kind of place that we want to live? Shouldn't we continuously be asking this question before we set into place the policies about how we're going to grow, the policies that set up the regulatory framework that build our cities, and the kind of infrastructure that we invest in that achieve those kinds of places? It seems like we're basing today's decisions on yesterday's answers. And so if we want to make something better, and we want to make better use of our tax dollars, and we want to compete globally, we're going to have to make some pretty fundamental changes in the way that we're doing things. But before we can change those policies and get our politicians to change those policies, we have to change what our expectations are and empower our politicians to do that. The summer before I went to graduate school, I went to Savannah, Georgia with my cousin. If you haven't been there, you have to go because it's a really great place to look at a really great city. But anyway, we were standing in the historic district near one of the city squares, and she said to me, does Savannah have a real city? And I had no idea what she was talking about because I've studied cities for a long time. Savannah is one of the most real cities in America. It takes the old world of Europe and marries it with the American street grid in a really beautiful and profound kind of way. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. And I guess she could see that expression on my face because then she followed up with the question, no, I mean, so does Savannah have a mall? And it occurred to me, and I knew this anyway, but it was sort of made crystal clear in that moment, that the problem with sprawl and the way that we've been building cities for the last 40 years is not just the physical separation of things by what you're doing or how much money you make or all the other complexities. It's also there's a cultural problem, and that's that generations of people, myself included, grew up with the shopping mall as the highest standard for how we build our cities. That is our cultural expectation for what we think is the best. That's what we think we want. We don't know that we never went shopping downtown. I never went shopping downtown as a kid. I don't know that the city can be built to better standards. So what's clear is that the problem is more than physical, that it's cultural, and we have to not only change the physical form of the city, but change the way that we think about the city. And the BeltLine, which I'll talk about in just a second, is already starting to change the way that we do it even before it's built. So the project, the BeltLine, was started life as my graduate thesis at Georgia Tech in 1999. It was based on the same old idea where the streetcars came out of downtown and opened up new territory for the development of the leafy green sort of in-town neighborhoods like Virginia Highlands and West End that you know today here in Atlanta. In the same way that the interstate highway system created a fundamentally different kind of framework on which the city can grow. The idea was about the design of an infrastructure system, a transit system, that would compel private market economic forces to build the kind of place that we might want to actually live. And it was combined with a linear park, and that became the core of the BeltLine proposal today. So the site for this incredible sort of idea of infrastructure is this 22-mile loop around the city of mostly abandoned and underutilized railroads. It's 22 miles long. It's 2 to 3 miles out in every direction from downtown. There are about 45 neighborhoods along its route, and currently there are about 100,000 people who live within walking distance of the route. And of course, there'll be a lot more as development comes. And this is what it looks like today. You can see all kinds of, just a few images, some really cool tunnels and structures, some really forgotten places, and some places that could be really beautiful if they were cleaned up just a bit. This is a great diagram of how it works with the infrastructure in the middle, the redevelopment on either side, and the leafy neighborhoods flanking that. For scale, this is the BeltLine on the city of Atlanta aerial, and this helps anybody from outside of town. This is the BeltLine overlaid on Manhattan. And here it is on Paris, just because I have to bring that back. Everything you know and love about Paris is within that blue line, which is the Peripherik Highway, which is essentially the same circumference as the BeltLine. So I graduated from Tech. I went to work for a design firm doing infill, mixed-use kind of projects, master plans for projects, and the loft, the architecture for that. And this one particular project, we were trying to decide, do we take the parking garage and shove it up against the abandoned railroad, or do we orient the project towards the BeltLine, hoping that it would become something else one day? And I was telling my coworkers about this project, this idea that I had in school, and they thought, wow, this is just too cool of an idea to not get out there. So we put together some letters and maps and mailed it out to everybody we could think of, the governor, the mayor, all the regional transportation agencies. Got a lot of great letters back saying, good luck with that. But got a great response from Kathy Woolard. She was on the city council and chair of the transportation committee. And she had just had this big meeting of all the regional transportation agencies and asking, what are you doing for the city of Atlanta, which is only about 1/10 of the regional population in the city. And they were all came in and they showed their slideshows, and they were all about moving people from way outside of town into downtown and back home at the end of the day, not for people who live in the city, not for people who are more likely to ride transit, more likely to want transit, more likely to pay for transit, have been paying for transit for 30 years with MARTA, and a large proportion of people who are dependent on transit to get around because they can't afford a car. There was really nothing for them. And literally that day, she left that meeting frustrated and went to her office, and this letter was on her desk. And she called us in, and we started going out. She thought, this is great. let's go test it out. And so we went to some neighborhood meetings in her district, and people started to really fall in love with this idea. And then she was elected city council president, so we took that conversation citywide. And we, the neighborhoods on the north and the east side of town who are already seeing a lot of growth and development saw as a way to sort of maintain their quality of life in the face of all that traffic and growth. And the south and the west, where there hasn't been any new development or investment over the last 30 years, they saw it as a way to attract that growth, but not just any kind of growth, but growth that would bring the grocery stores and other amenities that they need. So we just kept talking to people over about the course of about 3 years, and we built this unbelievable groundswell of public support for this idea that got the attention of the politicians, it got the attention of the planning officials, and we tested its feasibility and all that. It's a long story. But I want to make the point that it wasn't just passive support. It wasn't just, oh yeah, I like that idea, let's do it. It was people aggressively getting involved, taking ownership of the idea. The ownership of this project is in the people. They own it, and they will make sure that you know it when you try to make change the direction of it, so it's really cool. So we went around talking about this idea, and we talked about, three main components: transportation, economic development, and green space. So it's a low-impact rail kind of transit, but it links into MARTA, our rail system, on each of the 4 compass points and all the bus network, of course. And then a multi-use trail all along the 22 miles also that connects parts of an emerging regional trail network. So the second part is economic development. It balances growth across the city, brings new growth to the south and the west, which is needed, and it organizes all that growth around transit, which is great. And it also is funded by transit. That's a whole nother discussion, but it's funded basically through a tax increment finance district. And then the third part was green space. Green belt all around the city, connecting about 700 acres of existing city parks, along with recreational facilities, cultural and historic sites. And those were the 3 main components that we sold. But then what happened was really, really unbelievable, and that is that people started falling in love with this idea, and this groundswell of support started to bring up other ideas, and people brought their own ideas to the table. The Trust for Public Land came in and said, let's double down on parks. We're going to build 1,000 acres of new parks in addition to the ones that you got. The housing people said, let's make this the largest affordable housing initiative the city has ever undertaken. The public art folks came and said, what a great place for public art and cultural facilities. The preservation folks said, Atlanta doesn't have a waterfront. This is our waterfront opportunity. We're a railroad town. This is our identity. The Trees Atlanta came in with the idea of an arboretum that not only teaches people about trees, but about urban ecology, stormwater, invasive species, other environmental issues. And the street framework extended the public realm beyond the Beltline itself to make sure that these big industrial tracks that follow these old freight railroads are broken up in such a way that not only the neighborhood can access the Beltline across these sites, but also that dimensionally they're set up so that you're actually achieving the walking urban districts that you want. So that was it, and then this is based real bit quickly how it works. This is a typical Beltline neighborhood, Capitol View Manor in southwest Atlanta. It could be anywhere. That's my house. And there's the Beltline going through the red with the yellow. The yellow is the redevelopment area. And when basically the short version is you install the transit line and the trail in that old railroad. You add new parks where it makes sense. Infill development on vacant lots in these neighborhoods, extend that street framework across industrial sites, and then flesh it out with new public spaces and new compatible new development that sort of reinforces those communities. And so what's cool about the Beltline is it's not just a great idea, but we're actually building it. We've got 8 miles of interim hiking trails for hiking and mountain biking open right now. We're concluding this summer with a public art program, a temporary art program, which has been very successful. Here's my daughter, my 5-year-old daughter, in her first trail ride, riding part of the 2 sections of trail that are built. The sub-area planning process is ongoing, and also the corridor design, which the firm I work for, Perkins & Will, is doing the design of the corridor now, what it looks like, how you get to it, the landscape architecture, material, signage, lighting, all of that. It has to be beautiful and it has to work, and that's what I have the fortunate opportunity to work on now. So what's really great is that this coalition of people that brought this project to the table started out with a really unbelievable group, environmentalists, community organizers, and developers all at the same table, all wanting the same thing, which if you're in this world, you know that that's a pretty remarkable feat. And for all of those people wanting the same thing, and then as the vision expanded, it brought in a lot of other people with a lot of other ideas. And so you've got preservationists talking to housing advocates, and they've got a lot in common. They can build on that, not just for the Beltline, but beyond the Beltline. And it started to build these partnerships that are really valuable, not only for the Beltline, but for the city as a whole. And so as we started, so what's cool is that that's happening not only at a local level with the Beltline, but at a national level, and you're starting to see a lot of change in coordination and partnering at that level. In particular interest to me is the new coalition, the Interagency Partnership for Sustainable Communities, which is an alliance between HUD, USDOT, and EPA, where they're saying that the things that we're doing could accomplish your goals, and if we talk to each other, maybe we could accomplish more than just our individual things. So breaking these folks out of their silos and getting people talking together is really quite critical. Another example is on the public health front, whether it's the technical research by the Centers for Disease Control or the more public campaign of Michelle Obama's Let's Move initiative to reduce childhood obesity. The most compelling argument, I think, in changing the way that we build our cities is public health. All of our regulations about city form, whether it's zoning, subdivision regulations, police powers, anything has to do with the protection of our public health, safety, and welfare. I mentioned that in the beginning. And the same legal basis that separated that slaughterhouse from the single-family district that then started to change other things may also be reinterpreted now that we have evidence that the way that we've been building things isn't in our best interest. It's not in the best interest of our public health, safety, or welfare. And if we reinterpret that legally, then we have a real basis for changing policy, empowering politicians to do the right thing, and change the way that we do things. In the same way that the new laws against secondhand smoke have changed restaurants, bars, and public spaces dramatically in the last 10 years, that same legal basis is what can have dramatic impacts on the way we build our cities. So with that, I'll just end it by saying that all of that sort of proposition is pretty complex and challenging, and it will take probably a long time to do, hopefully not too long. But in the meantime, Atlanta, for whatever we can do as fast as we can, we're going to build the Beltline. And it's going to not only profoundly change the physical form of Atlanta, it's already changing the way that we think about the places that we want to live. Thank you.